Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, and unscripted. Conversations around the power of the people. Bernie or Bust rides again. This is from a fellow Bernie or Bust strategist. We need to target the Washington Post with a warning. We need to let every reporter and columnist we can find know that their attacks on Sanders will be helping Trump and that millions of voters will not come out for another Democrat. In short, peaceful revolution is necessary for democratic order to prevail over plutocratic order. The free trade model they embrace, free trade model, because it's free trade in name only, that model must not advance. The U.S. as worldwide protector of transnational corporate private empires is pure evil. The Bernie or Bust movement can fight fights Bernie himself can't. Obviously, the fight is against the DNC, but at this point, the media might be even more intimidated by Bernie or Bust. If I understand the new Bernie app, this is what his army of volunteers is doing, finding non-voters to motivate and poor voters to inform. And this is what I said. The Washington Post is one organ of a larger body. Symbolically, that body is the Clinton machine, but it's really just the ruling class. It's really just the ruling class. Our rulers have lots of different ways, different tentacles of the same octopus, and the Washington Post is maybe one of the biggest tentacles. But it's just, the octopus itself is just the ruling class. Those who have been under the boot of the oppression of the ruling class need to be the target of our efforts, Bernie or Bust, that is, efforts to spread the word about Bernie or Bust. Obviously, the ruling class is going to be happier with Trump than with Bernie. The last thing they want is for regular working class people to get riled up enough to put them out of power. They are using their information blockade, and I should say it's not merely a blockade, it's also poison in the water. It's not just keeping information out, it's giving wrong information, misleading information as well, to keep regular people from finding out that Bernie already has a powerful organization in place that is itching to start the fight of dismantling plutocratic power. If any of our efforts bear fruit, they will begin to attack not only Bernie, but any source of information that helps Bernie get the word out that it's open season on plutocratic power. Caitlin Johnstone, in one of her many articles about the complicit media, says that we all will be better off when the corporate rulers shift into attack mode, because then the regular people will be able to see the faces and hear the voices of their true oppressors. The Washington Post is attacking Bernie on the information front. The DNC leadership is attacking Bernie by running a slew of corporate-friendly, especially Elizabeth Warren, candidates to ensure a contested primary. Their corporate-friendly superdelegates then will step in and anoint Warren. The rulers clearly know that Warren, Biden, O'Rourke, Harris, and Buttigieg all will lose to Trump. But from a strategic standpoint, that's fine. All they need to do to stay in power is to ensure that Sanders doesn't win the nomination. After they successfully rig the nomination, their work is done and they can sit back and let lesser evilism do its work. I should admit that the kernel of this discussion, the very center of it, is an article I'm reading by Thomas Frank that shows how the Washington Post is doing its part of this evil work. This article is long and detailed. It talks about how lesser evilism works without naming it that, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting in the thought processes that surround the conversation, underlie the conversation that I'm relaying to you. Here's a quote. Now consider the recent history of the Democratic Party. Beginning in the 1970s, it has increasingly become an organ of this same class, the ruling class. Affluent white-collar professionals are today the voting bloc that Democrats represent most faithfully, and they are the people whom Democrats see as the rightful winners in our economic order. Hillary Clinton, with her fantastic resume and her life of striving and her much commented on qualifications, represents the aspirations of this class almost perfectly. An accomplished lawyer, she is also in with the foreign policy crowd. She has the respect of leading economists. She is a familiar face to sophisticated financiers. She knows how things work in the Capitol. To Washington Democrats, and possibly to many Republicans, she is not just a candidate, but a colleague, the living embodiment of their professional worldview. In Bernie Sanders and his political revolution, on the other hand, I believe these same people saw something kind of horrifying. A throwback to the low-rent Democratic politics of many decades ago. Sanders may refer to himself as a progressive, but to the affluent white-collar class, what he represented was atavism, a regression to a time when demagogues in rumpled jackets pandered to vulgar public prejudices against banks and capitalists and foreign factory owners. Ugh. Atavism. In biology, an atavism is a modification of a biological structure whereby an ancestral trait reappears after having been lost through evolutionary change in previous generations. So Bernie is a throwback. And here's another quote. But the factor that really mattered was that the Post's pundit platoon just seemed to despise Bernie Sanders. The rolling barrage against him began during the weeks before the Iowa caucuses, when it first dawned on Washington that the Vermonter might have a chance of winning. And so a January 20th editorial headlined, "Level with us, Mr. Sanders," decried his lack of political realism and noted with a certain amount of fury that Sanders had no plans for deficit reduction or for dealing with Social Security spending. Standard Post signifiers for seriousness. The problem when I quote this article is that it is dense because it has so many ideas that I could just start unpacking, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let you read it and unpack it yourself. What I wanted you to see is the elitism that's underneath everything the Washington Post does. And I've been working on that idea in other articles and other Bernie or Bust show episodes. But this is where Bernie or Bust comes in. Once you see what's going on, once you see what the Washington Post is doing and what the DNC is doing, what Third Way is doing, what Center for American Progress is doing, once you see how they're all just tentacles of the same octopus, then you can see that Bernie or Bust is probably the most powerful way to wake up the regular people who don't quite see what the Washington Post is doing. They don't quite see what CNN and MSNBC are doing. And let's not leave out the New York Times. They don't really understand what's going on. But with Bernie or Bust, they could wake up because it's very controversial, and they could say, "Oh, how dare you tell us we can't vote for anyone we want to? How dare you tell us that Bernie is the only person who can really unite all of the factions to defeat Donald Trump?" And I've said earlier that fear of Donald Trump is our best hope. So if regular people hear about the controversy swirling around the Bernie or Bust movement, their fear of Donald Trump may circumvent all of the strident efforts of the Washington Post, its pundit platoon, I love that, and others to keep the current rulers in power. Once working people, whatever color their collars, do the math and understand that only Bernie Sanders can defeat Donald Trump, the Washington Post will go full frontal. When that happens, the truly oppressed, such as workers in NAFTA-ravaged battleground states, will begin to see what's going on, and then the balance will tip drastically towards the only true populist candidate, Bernie Sanders.